Alright, I guess we might as well get into it then. So, I think pretty much everyone has said hi to me at this point or got subjected to my first ever lecture bash. Sorry about that, by the way. So, for those of you who have forgotten, my name is Sam Pack, and together with Chris Birch, that guy over there, we're essentially running this for Blackstone. Today we also have a beautiful guest lecturer, Ciara, who will be joining us to talk about something later, eventually. You can see we're very much on the ball here. Now, we were planning to do a workshop based on a question we talked about a fortnight ago, but my understanding is most of you guys are new or haven't done that. So, how many of you have actually prepared submissions for the misleading and deceptive thing we looked at a fortnight ago? Okay, there's two of you. Three, four, all right. Excellent. So that gives us a chord, nothing else, and I guess we'll either get the rest of you to watch or play around with some cats v dogs or something maybe. We'll get you guys involved, we'll work something out. Anyway, so that was... Hi.
Sorry.
You're right, you didn't miss anything at all. So that was the plan. I was going to briefly go over a couple of things, talk about how to deal with questions, and then get into the workshop. But before I do that, I might invite Ciara up here to join me.
You liked me, Sam.
Chris.
You liked me. I told him to write champion. Or ex-housemate, I'm not sure which.
So as you can see, we don't take things particularly seriously here. The idea is that this is going to be a very low-key way for you guys to get involved with mooting without having to dress up in a suit or appear before actual judges or anything of that kind. Hence the picture of me dressed up as a pirate, hence that one of Ciara, and so on. So Ciara was part of the Kirby team that won for UWA last year in Melbourne.
Who were the other members of that team, Sam?
It was Chris, he was involved, and Yvonne, who we will get to show up eventually. But anyway, so Ciara mooted in the grand final of that. One of the people who was judging that was Marilyn Warren, who is the Chief Justice of the Victorian Supreme Court. I can't remember exactly what she said, but the gist of it was that Ciara has style. So,
Evidently not.
I just make that point to say that Ciara's picked up on this mooting thing really well, and you should definitely listen to the things that she has to say.
Right, I'll make it quick because I know these guys love to talk. It'll depend on whether you're mooting for an internal competition or one of these longer competitions like Kirby or AAT that go over a long period of time. But just drawing on Kirby, I guess a few points that I picked up out of it from the coaching sessions and from the competition and from the feedback we got, or at least I got personally, there'd be a few points. So, firstly, I'd say striking the balance between flexibility and always being open to responding to questions, which I'm sure you guys have mentioned in other weeks, or we'll talk about, and having some kind of structure in your arguments and your thought processes. So, as you would have heard and will heard, answering questions is very much at the heart of mooting. It's a discussion and a chat with the bench. If you try and read a script, read your submissions, it's not going to work. It's not going to work. They'll interrupt you, they'll ask you a question, that might take you to the back of your notes, and if you just try and go back and read again, you lose the flow completely of your argument and you won't be able to persuade the judges and you won't win. So, I'd say what you need to do first is get your argument and your submission very, very clear in your head. Be able to talk them over aloud yourself or to a friend, and then to keep that argument in mind the whole time. And when you do get asked questions, go to that point. Flow with the judge, follow them wherever they want to go, even if you think it's illogical to start there, just go with it. So that's one hand. On the other hand, sometimes the judges will get very, very fixated on a point that they're interested in, but that won't win your argument, and that will eat up loads and loads of time if it's complicated and messy and not something you'll be winning points on. So with Kirby, I was often mooting with Sam, so it was a long problem question about contracts and consumer law. So very, very broadly speaking, I would do the first two submissions about that there had been a breach of the express and implied terms of the contract, and that there had been a breach of the Australian consumer law. And these breaches had, in the scenario, led to lots and lots of damage that were causing a business that breached the contract or had their to pay up. So that was the debate. So I was dealing with the breach issues, and Sam, who followed me, was dealing with causation of damages, remoteness, and all the damages issues. But my submissions would go first, so I'm really wanting to get into these breaches of the contract and breaches of the Australian consumer law that were really crucial to us establishing our claim and winning when we were at government working on. So we need to show these breaches, and then he's going to say, they caused all this loss, you guys have to pay up. But whenever I would start in the early rounds making this argument, the judges would say, oh, but who cares about all these breaches? It didn't cause them any loss. What loss are you talking about? What loss are you talking about? And that, in our mental structure, was way at the back, and they would want to push you down a rabbit hole and say, oh, well, did putting graffiti on this plastic tent really cause the tent to fall apart, and can they claim $50,000? And it just messed completely with our logical structure and with persuading the judge. So if the judge asked me, oh, but did that really cause the loss? I mean, maybe the tent was old anyway. I can't really say, oh, you may just shut up, I'll get back to it later. Well, I did risk it, because these guys wouldn't have been happy.
The tempted as she was at times.
It was coming. So instead, what we picked up throughout the tournament is really framing your argument from the start. Differs a little bit for respondent, but I'm just drawing on some personal experience. So being a appellant, get them soft with a nice introduction and say, you'll have your submissions, and you might point, oh, of course, there were damages, this caused our claimant to suffer a huge financial loss. We're talking about these hundreds of thousands of dollars in Appendix 1. It's all there are damages. My colleague Sam will deal with that shortly. But firstly, I'd just like to establish the breaches that really caused this huge financial loss for our client. So when you've kind of taken their hand and walked them there, they can't really sort of back up, and it wouldn't really make sense for them to back up and say, oh, but I want to know about whether the $50,000 from the tent is really something that you can be claiming, or did that just happen randomly? So if you're sort of carrying them along with you, they're willing to come if it's logical, and then you can get through your content more quickly, more logically, and hopefully more persuasively. So I think striking that balance between answering their questions and engaging and responding with them is very important. But if you've got a very sort of broad mental structure and a plan that you think best sets out your argument, then try and frame the debate so they'll come along with you. That was my second point, and again, I don't know how much you've done on mooting persona.
Not much at all with most of the people here today.
Yeah, have you guys done ADR with Camilla Anderson, the Danish?
Yeah.
Danish. Yeah, I'm sure in your JD you'll encounter Camilla, who's a fierce Danish commercial arbitrator and pro-mooting coach.
And we'll be here sometime later in the semester as well. So
yeah, so it's definitely a session worth attending. If you're boring and getting tired of these guys, stick through it with Camilla. So we did some training sessions with her, and she's very much on establishing a persona. And she says what she thinks. She doesn't bite her tongue. So Chris, you're an arrogant twat.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Well, you already did that.
Yeah. And me, oh, you're a cold bitch. Nobody wants to listen to you if you're frowning like that. And she acknowledged that gender comes into it. You need to smile. You need to be nicer. I mean, just try and be nice. And it doesn't come naturally to me. So I think, again, it's about striking a balance. You can't develop a persona that is not you. You will find your mooting persona. Sam's is very lovely and soft and calm, and the judges just melt. You can see it. Chris's is a bit quicker and sort of sharper, maybe? I don't know. Just that's a bit harder to describe. Yeah, but very different, but they both work. And I just can't, in the grand final, the girl on the opposing team was very smiling and just nodding a lot. I don't know how to describe it, but friendly. Yeah, and I can't really do that very well. So I tried to take Camilla's feedback on board about a bit more eye contact, smiling a little bit, or at least not looking at the judges like they're an idiot when they ask you a stupid question. So I tried to pick up on that, but also your persona just comes out eventually. So I picked up on some of her feedback, but then throughout the competition I tried to work on that, and it did work a bit, but then some of the feedback I got from that, was that Queensland lady? Mooting coach from QU. Yeah, and she was like, oh, it's great, you've got a strong, serious voice, you know, we don't hear that much amongst girls. So I think in a way, you've got to definitely take the feedback you get on, but just because Sam speaks nice and softly, or just because you see a girl in a competition that's very smiley and friendly, doesn't mean it's your style, and you could win doing any style you want. So they would be my 2 points.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that last one, which is a great one by the way, don't go anywhere just yet, is really important, and that's something that we've stressed a lot in the lectures we've done so far, that mooting is a very subjective thing. You do need to find your own style. What works for me is not going to work for Ciara, is not going to work for Chris, is not necessarily going to work for any of you guys. So take everything we say with a grain of salt, and that includes this. The other thing I wanted to ask about is, am I right in saying that before Kirby you didn't have a lot of mooting experience?
Before I dropped the first time I did moot.
Okay, but I just wanted to ask.
Minimal.
I just wanted to ask, how did you find dealing with nerves, like going through that whole process? I know that's something that...
Camilla said I looked nervous, I think, or... Well, Camilla told us to hold things, or was that someone else?
I can't remember exactly. Anyway, nerves are definitely a thing when you're mooting. You'll see every time I get up to moot, no matter that I've done it 100 times before, my hands will be shaking like crazy.
She told you to hold a pen or put your hands in
your
your lap.
Yeah, but she told me to stop holding a pen because I started pointing at people with it. Don't do that. But I guess the point I'm trying to make and get at here is just be aware of these things. I always think of mooting like being a duck, right? So above the water, you want to look all calm and collected, not a care in the world, you're just a duck going about your day, right? And under the water, your feet might be paddling like crazy trying to keep yourself afloat. That's fine, just try and keep it as under the water as possible for the most part. Be the duck.
Maybe one other point, it's not duck related.
Get out.
It's very, very minor, but if you finish getting through your content, say I conclude my submission, sit down, and they love it. If you've convinced them, you finish, don't just try and eat up your time. I remember in our first or second moot, I finished, and I was used to being harassed by Camilla, and I think we had 15 minutes, and I finished in 7. The judge hadn't asked anything really, she wasn't tough, so I sort of, oh, this is awkward, sat down, and then in the feedback she says, I love the fact you just finished, like, it was short, that's good. Maybe she was just bored and wanted to get out of there, but there's no point filling your mood with stuff if it's not actually achieving anything.
That's all I've got. Absolutely. Alright, thank you very much for that. I hope you guys found that useful to some extent. Before Ciara runs off...
I'll watch your dog and cat.
Yeah. Alright, so before I was going to go into questions a little bit. Before I do that, I might just try and work out what we're going to do exactly. So we had about 3 or 4 people who prepared for the misleading or deceptive. Would you guys like to do a moot in front of the rest of the class?
I think
Mine's like pretty short, but I only saw the question. Just thinking which side they're on.
That's another thing. So
Yeah,
hands up for opponents.
Oh, there's an opponent.
Oh, well,
plaintiff, defendant.
Plaintiff.
Alright.
So, and one. So, one there was this.
Yeah. Sorry, I don't know what they mean.
Oh,
sorry.
So, the plaintiff's the one.
The plaintiff in that case was Monty,
Yes.
and the defendant would be Dr. Finkelstein.
Yeah, so the plaintiff is the person who wants something out of it, so they reckon the other person has done something wrong and they want money for it. The respondent is, of course, the person who's saying, no, we're fine.
Yeah. Alright, let's do it this way then. So Sam, you've prepared for... Alright.
First one.
Yeah. Alright, do you want to come up and do that in front of the class then? And then we'll see how we get into that. Oh, you knew it was going to be today.
Now that we mentioned nervousness.
Yeah.
Practice makes perfect.
I have a great story about nerves, actually.
Yeah.
I will tell
Sam is making fun to watch, that's why we're doing this to him.
Yeah, absolutely.
But
Now,
Sam.
well, I do sort of want to put 3 people here to serve as judges, and it feels like asking questions.
Oh,
I've got
right.
prepared questions. Yeah, absolutely.
I know exactly nothing
Take a
about
seat up here.
So who's the
Dr.
That actually helps.
I was going to worry about that afterwards. Come on, get involved.
And who else needs to
Sure, this will be good.
ask questions?
How about the guy who's prepared for the response? Because you know where your weaknesses are,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
At least vaguely. Yeah.
I don't know what my weakness is.
Yeah.
No, these guys saying.
Alright, so I've got some likely questions there. Oops. Are you going to take me by asking for a summary of the facts first?
Are you the defendant or the plaintiff? This is prepared by. Yeah.
He's the plaintiff.
Yes. Thank you.
Is there a time limit, sir?
I'm going to give you, I'll say,
Just like keep clapping if I keep on going.
yeah, I'm going to give you about 8 minutes, which is what we said.
But I think we're good.
Up to you, Kira.
Good.
Alright, so we'll skip appearances because we don't need to do that. Who's read the fact scenario? Is that most people vaguely aware of it?
Let's have a give a break summary of the facts.
Alright.
Yeah.
Whenever you're ready to take us away, Sam. And guys, feel free to jump in with questions whenever you want.
Just like during the summary of the facts.
Yeah, probably not during the summary of facts. Feel free to ask the questions I've got written down. Feel free to ask any other questions.
So when is it appropriate to ask questions?
Whenever you want. Whenever he says something you don't like, whenever you want him to explain something a little bit more.
You have control.
Yeah. And he has to be very respectful to you because you are judges. You are justices of the Supreme Court of Western Australia, and that's a very difficult position. Oh, we can be federal.
Okay. Should put the federal
You mean just because it was a federal statute?
Yeah.
Oh, well caught.
Well, you can sue for damage.
Okay.
Anyway,
Let's go.
if you're good.
Your result, I'll give a brief summary of the facts. At all material times, Mr. Montgomery Jones suffered from Burns disorder, which is a rare strain of male pattern baldness, for which there exists no conventional treatment. And in 2014, Dr. Finkelstein, which is the defendant in this case, made representations on a television program to the effect that he had developed a working treatment for Burns disorder. Mr. Finkelstein made this representation on the basis that he had theoretical evidence, theoretical calculations on the matter, but had admitted that he had not actually tried to apply these theoretical calculations in practice, this requiring substantial funding to do so, being on the program Shark Tank. Montgomery Jones then contacted Dr. Finkelstein, who made the representation directly to Montgomery Jones that the treatment would work, and the treatment in fact did not cure Montgomery Jones' condition. Montgomery Jones is pursuing an action in the Federal Circuit of Western Australia for misleading and deceptive conduct contrary to Section 18 of the Australian Consumer Law. Senior counsel for the plaintiff makes 4 submissions. First of all, that Finkelstein actually engaged in misleading and deceptive conduct. Secondly, the conduct did actually mislead and deceive the plaintiff. In the alternative, the conduct was likely to mislead and deceive the plaintiff, thereby satisfying 18C. And in the alternative, we make submissions on Section 4, which is that the representation made by Dr. Finkelstein was as to a future matter, and that there is no evidence that Dr. Finkelstein contended today that would to suggest that this representation made was founded. The first submission that counsel wishes to make today is that conduct is misleading and deceptive if it makes a representation of fact or a state of affairs, whether or not that state of affairs existed in the past, the present, or the future. So the state of affairs can exist at any time. And the authority for this is Burns and Dorotea Proprietary Limited, which is found in 69 Australian Law Report 715 at page 720. I'll dispose the formal citation for now in the future. The second part of the submission is that the conduct was misleading because Finkelstein made representations as to his state of mind that the calculations that he had made would work in practice, which he had ostensibly made these representations on the grounds that he had reasonable grounds for having such a state of mind, that the calculations as made would always work in practice, that there was a complete parallel between theory and practice there. Now, the authority for misleading and deceptive conduct being made pursuant to a state of mind is the case of Global Sportsman and Mirror newspapers. And there's later authority for other similar points. The Council just wishes to draw your Honour's attention to the case of Elders Trustee and Executor Co. Limited and E.G. Rees Proprietary Limited. I understand that the Honours do not have copies of the cases in front of you, so I'll read you an extract. Conduct may be misleading or deceptive, even though there's no intention to deceive or mislead. A statement such as evaluation is not necessarily misleading or deceptive simply because it's erroneous. But it does convey, however, that an opinion is held and that there is a basis for that opinion. And the representation made is that there is a basis for an opinion. And a statement...
What's the basis for the opinion?
The basis for this particular opinion was, in this case, was that there were theoretical calculations which would show that the treatment would work in theory.
But he didn't have any practice on this.
Yes, but that this was not actually backed up in practice. And the state of mind which Finkelstein made representations to Montgomery Jones regarding...
Montgomery Jones specifically, or because it was on TV, wasn't it?
Yes, it was on TV, and then also a representation made over the phone to Montgomery Jones, as I stated in the summary facts, was that these theoretical calculations would perfectly translate to what existed in reality. Whereas any prudent scientist would know that a theoretical calculation exists only in the world of theory, just because the equations check out. It doesn't necessarily mean that something is going to apply in practice. Any prudent scientist would know this.
So what then would Dr. Finkelstein have needed to have done to not mislead Montgomery Jones?
In order to not mislead Montgomery Jones, what Dr. Finkelstein should have disclosed was that these calculations made were as to theory only, and that the money that he needed for the research was to determine whether or not that these calculations would work in practice, as opposed to making the representation that these calculations would actually work in practice on the basis that they worked in theory. So that's the representation that Dr. Finkelstein should have made in order to not have the misleading and deceptive conduct translate against him. Now, Your Honours, I'll move on to my fourth submission, considering the fact that I've gone considerably, potentially over time here, which is that in the alternative representation was made as to a future matter, and Dr. Finkelstein can't show that there are any reasonable grounds for making that representation. And as a result, the representation is taken to be misleading. Now, I'll direct your Honours' attentions to Section 4 of the First Federal Competition Consumer Act, which is known as the Australian Consumer Law, which states that a representation, I don't actually have this section in front of me, Your Honours, but a representation as to a future matter is taken to be misleading unless evidence can be shown at the trial that there was a reasonable basis for holding, for making that representation. And Dr. Finkelstein can show no reasonable basis for making that representation. In fact, he's admitted on the facts that the calculations which he used to prove that in theory the treatment for Burns disease would work were flawed because of a mathematical error in making the calculations. And so there can be no evidence that Dr. Burns contended today, which would suggest that the treatment would work and that these statements were not misleading.
But at the time, didn't he believe himself that they were theoretically viable?
Yes, he believed that they were theoretically viable, but he couldn't have rationally held a belief that the calculations made in theory would have necessarily always translated into practice. He couldn't have held that belief, which is one part of misrepresentation. And this, in fact, what we now have is a circumstance where the entire theoretical belief is completely discounted because of the fact that there was a mathematical grounding in the calculations. Do you Honours have any further questions?
No.
No. I conclude my submission.
Can we clap?
Yeah.
Thank you for being academic and doing that.
What?
Thank you for being academic and doing
Oh,
that.
I understand half this. One question for you, rather than Sam. Are you happy to appear in the video?
Yeah,
So we upload it. Okay. Cool. I'll ask that of anyone who jumps in today, and if you're not, we'll obviously cut it out.
Alright, before we jump into anyone else, what did you guys think of
having him submit to you like that?
I didn't really know what I was doing.
Fair enough.
Do most judges?
Honestly, most judges feel the exact same way. I know every time I've sat in there, I feel like a deer in the headlights, especially when he's just staring at you. Because you're never going to know it as well as the person making submissions know.
I thought that he knew his material very well.
Yeah.
I was conscious of not making him feel really uncomfortable because I've been, and I thought he was doing very well and knew his material really well. Yeah.
Literally just ripped up Pillsbury's.
But, you know, I thought, yes, I could see that at times when you asked a couple of questions, it was as you were saying, I've got an audit to this now, I've got to go back.
Yeah.
It slipped into it pretty quickly, I thought.
Yeah. How did you find his... Sorry, I'm trying not to...
Yeah.
How did you find his speed as he was talking?
Too fast.
Yeah.
Yeah, I ended up brushing away.
But that's just nerves. That's
Yeah.
that's nerves.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is something you will see almost every time someone moves. Slowing down is a hard thing to do when you're actually up there.
Just tell me slow down or give up.
What's that?
You would make slow down Sam. Just slow down or give up on the screen. What's that? Thanks.
And that's very, I mean, that's probably not a fair point, but no, the general idea certainly is when you're mooting, you should almost be speaking at a speed where you feel like the people listening to you are going to think you reckon they're stupid. Like every single word is being placed where you want it to be in such a slow manner that while they might think that for a second, they'll soon realise that actually it means they can keep up with the very complicated stuff that you're presenting to them. Because, I mean, we didn't have the material in front of us today. Judges won't. They won't be able to know exactly what the reference you're giving them is about. And unless you give them a second or two to think about each word you're saying, they're going to get lost and they're going to have no idea what your argument is about. Exactly.
I think like the difficulty which causes the speed up is the feeling that you have too much content to get through.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So like I felt I had like 4 rounds and there's no idea for the same.
No.
I thought you were going so quickly so that we wouldn't interject and ask questions.
Oh yeah, that's one rule.
That's definitely something you do sometimes. And I guess that also raises the other thing. I know Sam was trying to cover all of his bases there. He said, oh, it was misleading and deceptive, and it was likely to mislead and deceive. Oh, and in the alternative, if it was a representation as to a future matter, it was misleading there as well. Yeah. So he basically had 3 bites of the apple where he only needed to get up on one of those.
Yeah.
If you've got a short amount of time, you have a lot of options. Sometimes it's better to say, okay, this is my best argument. I'm going to make that argument and then move on to whatever else I need to get to. Like in this case, Sam didn't address, because of time, whether this guy had actually been misled or deceived.
Oh yeah, that's just like...
Bear in mind as well that as much as mooting leads to the kind of oral advocacy that lawyers do, that this is practice for standing up in the court and addressing real judges who are going to ask questions almost as deceptive as yours. And I thought they were actually really fair and good questions, even though you didn't know necessarily the whole thing. That being able to, in mooting at least, realise that it's about being both convincing in what you do say, but also presenting in a style that wins over the judge means that you win the moot. You might not, as it were, have won the court case for your client, but you can still be the best person speaking in that court. And if it's a choice between speaking slowly and convincing them of 1 or 2 of your submissions rather than all 4, then that's better to leave something behind than it is to try to cover absolutely everything, but leave the judge at the end going, I'm not quite sure what he said.
Alright.
Sorry.
No,
this isn't about you, Sam.
No,
this is about You're just here for through reach.
Well, I think that should segue into some individual practice.